Right. Okay. So, welcome everyone. So, the days are getting shorter and we're on the cusp of October. We're still in an uncertain state of lockdown, possibly looking at another 6 months of uncertainty and varying degrees of randomly allocated freedom and restrictions. I'm finding this so unreal in a way. And I think, probably none of us expected all of this to go on for quite so long. So in a way, I'm so pleased that, we've managed to keep this group and this conversation going. And I just want to say a huge thank you, to everyone here who's contributed so far, either as a guest and a speaker, through posting images or just being part of this audience for these reflections. And I think, thinking and reflecting about the times that we're in is just so important for us in these situations. And, some of the dialogue that happens on the periphery of this has been really incredibly, informative. And I feel like in some ways I've grown as a person, and I'm, there's certain people who've really helped me with that. So thank you. And I think for me to hear about the background and this artistic story and inspiration of our members has just been a highlight and has been really inspirational to me and provided me with new perspectives. And today I'm really, really pleased to kind of welcome Jill. Jill, you've been a really great member of this group, and just, to hear about your story, I'm really looking forward to it. So a bit of background from you, you've left a long career in the arts education, and I think when we first met, you were actually still at Hull College and came to see me at the university to talk about something. And you made a great impression then, and now you're managing Critical Fish, which is an artist-led project which promotes critical but accessible writing about art and visual culture. And it's the quality of that writing in there is beautiful and brilliant, and what you're doing on the website as well is fascinating. And for everybody in this group, if you haven't checked it out, please do visit or follow them on Twitter or Facebook. And then you're also doing a PhD on public art in northern coastal cities. So, that's brilliant. And I just want to say this because it really was a highlight for me during 2017. And it was produced by you. And that was Fountain 17, that celebration of the dual anniversaries of Marcel Duchamp's Fountain and Armitage Schenck's. And, some of those events in down Humber Street, that procession behind. And was it, what's she called? Oh, she's a friend of Martin's, the artist, the singer, and she kind of walked. What was she called? Anyway, can't remember.
Amanda. Was it Amanda? Amanda Lowe? No.
Anyway, it was amazing. Some really, really memorable moments there. So what I hope that, you'll tell us all more about all the great things that you've done and that you've got up your sleeve. So without further ado, over to you, Jill.
Thank you. So I'm going to screen share, I think. And then I'm going to, there we are. Can everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excellent, good. Okay, so I'll start. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about myself. I'm not at the moment a maker of images as such, maybe unfortunately, and maybe that's something I'll return to. So I suppose if I talked about my work at the moment, it's as Marianne's just reflected, it's researching, writing about art, currently public art in northern deindustrialized cities. I also work on collaborative projects, and I suppose those are really made up of creating opportunities for artists or writers and then pulling those together into some kind of whole, whether that's an exhibition or a publication. For most of my life, I've been a teacher, which I've absolutely loved, and that's where a lot of my current creative work comes from, really. And I've started off the presentation, what I wanted to do was get some kind of crossover between still life and my interest in public art. So this is a a piece called The Red House, and it's in Sunderland. It's just along the river, and it's a kind of interior of a house outside in the open air. So that's my opening slide. So to start at the beginning, I went to art college in Exeter and I studied fine art in the days when tutors were in the pub most of the day, if not all of the day. And one of my most significant events was booking Sting and the Police for £50. And here's a little bit of evidence of that. And I've dined out on that ever since. It's been part of my get to know you session with new students each year. And we're still all in contact, you know, some of the old art college gang, and we still argue over who was the one who booked them, who was the social secretary, and I definitely think it was me. So that's my art college days. And then to jump forward about 30 years, so that's jumping over a lot of teaching, having 3 children, and I'm going to land really with in 2010 and the second year of my MA. So I began studying art history with the Open University. And then I really shifted from writing and thinking about painting, which really was my first love, to writing and thinking about public arts. And I suppose looking back, that's a bit of a marriage between my politics and my art, and between the social and the aesthetic. And that kind of collaboration, or even antagonism, really is something that I'm still writing about, really. The Inside Outside House by Rachel Whiteread changed the way that I thought about art, and it's never far away from what I'm currently thinking or writing about. It's a piece of work that was demolished twice. The original house was like the mould for the artwork, and that was demolished to make the artwork, and then the artwork itself was demolished. So demolished, absent public art is currently something that I'm thinking about. So often what happens is my research comes back to meet itself. It's not a linear thing. And then in the final year of my MA, I wrote about Anish Kapoor's Temenos, which is in Middlesbrough, in the disused dock area, which is called Middlehaven, and you might be able to see the transporter bridge in the background for those of you that know Middlesbrough. And if Whiteread's piece made me think differently, this made me look differently. It made me just look differently at art and at the world in general. It made me pay more attention. And a little window into that is that as you walk around this sculpture, there is no coherent whole. There's no way that you can make sense of it as a structure, because it's so visually deceptive. What you just get is lots of separate and contradictory views. So this piece to me was about looking, and I was really drawn to the kind of complex abstract art in a down at heel impoverished place, and all the kind of social questions that raises. So on finishing my MA, I entered into a kind of bit of a manic 5 years, a bit of a crazy era, where I was doing, really looking back on it, was like extreme teaching, like crazy teaching, writing courses, teaching this, joining with that, doing a new version of this. It was like a crazy accelerated time. I was also doing my PhD, but really not much really. It was hard to kind of do that as well, and being involved with some creative projects. And sometimes those different elements got tangled up, and sometimes that was really good, like really positive, to be reading texts with students that then would go into my PhD, or doing creative projects with people that then I might write about. So sometimes it was really good that those crossed over. Sometimes it was just quite confusing. So in 2013, I made a film which documented public art that was made for the Open University when it was their 60-year anniversary of the University of the Air speech that was made by Harold Wilson. And there were projects in Cardiff, Milton Keynes, Belfast, and I think it was in Edinburgh. And I did the Cardiff and Milton Keynes ones. And these are just some snapshots. I probably won't say too much about them, but it was a really interesting time. I interviewed artists, interviewed audiences. One was a sound piece, one was a performance piece. So it was a really interesting start to this crazy time. And then to 2017 and to Fountain 17, which Marianne has talked about. I put the image in from the exhibition when it went to Stoke because of Lucy's talk last time, and she showed us the images of the bottle kilns near where she lives in Stoke. So I thought, oh, I'll show some images from you know, to connect with her presentation. Unfortunately, she's not here. But yeah, as Marianne said, it was the coincidence of dates. 1817, Armitage Shanks began. 1917, Duchamp's Fountain that was never actually exhibited. And then 2017, when Hull was City of Culture. So that was the spark. This is some of the exhibition in Stoke, actually in an old bottle kiln. So that was just amazing. We put the exhibits around the museum and in the old bottle kilns. And you can see some of the work from the prison here. I don't know whether Lisa or Graham might recognise some of the artwork that's just strung up under the window. And then on the right, there's a piece by Neville Gabby, which he turned a urinal into a drinking fountain. So for Fountain, we worked with Neville Gabby and with Assemble, both of whom I'd come across because of my research and just thought, oh, I'm going to ask them, see if they'd be interested. So it's an example of where I suppose research and creative production overlapped. Anyway, yeah, Marianne said it. We had a great time with Fountain. It was like a really magical time, and Anne-Marie had some work in it, but I haven't got a photograph of that here. Oh, here's just a photograph from the factory floor. So this is bringing ceramic production up to date, and we offered the opportunity for artists to visit the factory. Some of them worked in the factory, and the factory is an amazing place. So this is just a photograph of some of the artists, you know, kind of having the factory tour. And then in 2018, which was also the year I got made redundant, Lauren and I launched Critical Fish, and that really emerged from the sort of City of Culture year. And we wanted it to be a kind of forum for discussion and debate about visual culture. It's, you know, it's meant to be, well, it is free, it's meant to be inclusive and accessible, but critical writing. We are truthfully struggling at the moment. It's very hard to get funding in the current climate, although I do still keep trying, but I think I've lost my touch a bit. But we're still carrying on with the website, carrying on with some projects, ticking over where we can, and then if we get some funding, we're quite committed to having the print versions, the actual physical versions. So when we can, we'll get some of those, you know, another issue printed. And then I just wanted to draw attention or highlight two particularly influential events that happened in 2015 during that 5-year frenetic period. And one was a Theaster Gates piece that took place in Bristol called Sanctum. And if you can probably see from the images, he built a structure inside the ruins of an old church, and then opened that space for performers and artists, writers, poets from Bristol to have either a half an hour or an hour slot in that space. And then the audience came along and they could take potluck. You just went in and kind of were an audience for whatever happened to be on. And I think I must have gone about 2 or 3 times. Again, it was really magical and really influenced me. And Claire Doherty, who was, I suppose, I'm not sure whether you'd say the director of Situations, which is a public art organisation in Bristol. She talked about this as a stepping back and sharing of the stage for creative production, and that's been like a key phrase that I use in my PhD. And then in 2015, also in 2015, Assemble won the Turner Prize for their work or their collaboration with Granby Four Streets Community Land Trust in Toxteth in Liverpool. And this again was such a magical moment. I can remember going to college the next day and doing my cats lessons and being so excited and talking to the students about it. And all through my PhD, there are all these examples of these crossovers between housing projects and arts projects, and the role of art in this case to save houses, to save the street, to save the neighbourhood. So this was a really exciting one for me. So following redundancy in 2018, I had more time for my PhD, so it has progressed. My colleague Steve used to say that all I ever did was write the same paragraph that then I would churn out for college evaluation things or Open University evaluation things. So redundancy gave me the opportunity to get my teeth into it more and to write more than a paragraph. So I'm writing about public art in Middlesbrough, Liverpool and Hull, and each chapter has a kind of subplot. So in Middlesbrough, I'm writing about public art as text, words as art, really, and so a bit of a focus on the visuality of words and how words signify through what they look like as much as what they say. And the 2 pieces here, one is a Lawrence Weiner, never known how to pronounce him, Weiner piece on the outside of Mima, which is just a phrase. A line is a line for all that. It's no longer there. It was taken down in 2014. And the other is the Klaus Oldenburg and Cozy van Bruggen's Bottle of Notes, which is a kind of sculpture, maybe with some pop art influence, which is just outside the gallery. And in my mind, one is very easy to read but difficult to understand, and the other one is very, very hard to make out words. So I kind of comment on those issues. And in Liverpool, my subplot is housing arts projects. So the photograph on the left is 2 adjoining terrace houses that were going to be demolished. They were saved and they've become a winter garden, which opened just last year. It was very much Assemble worked in conjunction with Granby Community Land Trust. So they came up with some plans, they built a sort of model maquette thing, and they didn't lead it, but they supported the creation of this space. And I've been in there and talked to some of the members of the original Community Land Trust, and it's a really special space. And I don't know if you can you see like a chandelier just hanging down from the ceiling above the tree or the plant. And that was produced by Nina Edge, who was the first artist in residence at the Winter Gardens. And I've just got a quote from Nina Edge here, which I'm going to read. "For the light to come on inside this once abandoned house is a great achievement. It comes after a time of darkness across Liverpool 8, when hundreds of houses were empty, dark by day and dark by night. Now the light of light shines again in these streets, rescued and re-inhabited by local people. Artificial light is a marker of life taken for granted until it goes out." And I'm finding, as I approach rewriting my whole chapter, that I'm definitely going to use light and shadow, places, people coming into the light or falling into the shadow is going to be quite an important motif in that chapter. The other photograph is of the workshops, assemble workshops, where they make, amongst other things, ceramic tiles, and this workshop uses, like, what's the word for it? So all the debris from knocking down houses is kind of reworked and becomes these lovely tiles and other objects for houses. So it's all kind of, what's the word for it? I can't remember the word. Reused. And some of their work, some of the work that Assemble did, some of the techniques they tried out in the Armitage factory. So that's quite exciting. And what they did in the Armitage factory was applying, instead of glazing with colour after something's been fired, they tried applying the colour to the sort of slip, the liquid slip. So we saw them doing that in the factory. So that's Assemble. And this is Nina Edge again as a public artist. And she produced this piece for the Wealth Streets in Liverpool, which are adjacent to Granby and were also earmarked for demolition. And so they also saw lots of community-led housing action. And what I really love about this piece is it isn't a massive iron, steel, concrete form. It's quite a humble domestic artwork, you know, on a piece of net curtain, hand embroidered, but it opens up all the issues about what is public, what is private, and it's activated as you walk past. It activates the lighting so that the embroidery and the design on the net curtains becomes visible. And it made me think about how in recent times we're activating our windows, aren't we? Or people have activated their windows with little messages and rainbows and artworks. And there's just a little bit more of the close-up of the detail of the net curtains that Nina Edge did. So, and the other housing project that I'm writing about in Liverpool is for Neville Gabby's work with there was an estate called Shield Park Estate in North Liverpool, where 3 tower blocks were knocked down, were demolished, and Gabby's work was involved. He wasn't able, he maybe didn't even want to, but it wasn't about saving and preserving the tower blocks, but it was about creating some kind of memory of tribute to the life and the people and the culture of the, you know, of the residents that had lived there. And one phase of the project was Gabby and a whole load of other artists and writers occupied the tower block alongside residents and used the flats as studios and exhibition spaces. And the piece on the left, flat, is, I think, simply the contents of the flat squashed together, made into sheets and accumulated to make this cuboid shape. So that is the flat, but in a new form. And so that for me was a really exciting project that I've been writing about. Also in Liverpool, and before the more recent Black Lives Matters actions in Bristol and other cities, in Liverpool, I did come across and was tackling issues to do with problematic and shameful histories. So it was important for me to think about public art is about celebrating heritage and identity of a place, so that tourists and investors are attracted to that place. So I was very familiar with that idea. But of course, I had to think what happens when histories aren't a cause for celebration, but should still be remembered. And in Liverpool, there's lots of reminders that the city was built on profits from the slave trade. So there's road signs, there's images on the outsides of buildings, on the top of churches, I mean, Anne-Marie might know more about this than me, but there are a lot of references to the slave trade, and they are celebrations, they're commemorations of it, really. But there are also things that speak back to that history. So, for example, there's a slavery museum. And then just these two examples here. So last year, Theaster Gates had an exhibition called Amalgam in Tate, Liverpool, which was documenting a way of life on the island of Malaga, which is off America, where there was a mixed race community that lived together, worked together well, not perfect, I'm sure not perfectly, but pretty harmoniously, considering that on the mainland America that would be considered immoral and illegal. And what happened in the end was the inhabitants of the island were forcibly shipped off the island onto mainland and then separated racially and lived separately, you know, black and white living separately. So Gates, I suppose, documented that in this exhibition in Tate, Liverpool. And to me, it was like really interesting to have an exhibition about this history in the very spaces where the goods that would have come from the slave trade would have been stored. So Tate, Liverpool, as I'm sure you all know, is in the warehouses where maybe the sugar from the slave trade would have been stored. So to have this exhibition in that space was very, I don't know, it seemed to me to be really important. And the other example is from the Nelson Monument, which is in Exchange Flag Square, which is in the centre of Liverpool, and it's supposed to be representing French prisoners of war, but potentially there may be a covert reference to the suffering of slaves in the slave trade. But the name of the square, Exchange Flag Square, comes from the way merchants exchange flags from their slave ships as kinds of business cards. So I suppose what I'm saying is that I was writing about this and thinking about this before the Black Lives Matters actions, and will hope to carry on and build on this in perhaps some writing that I'm thinking about starting quite soon. In Hull, this is my fave, I absolutely love the fish trail. My subplot is public art that involves the viewer in the shared experience of public space. So that all of the pieces in Hull are to do with walking to get to know the city, walking in different ways than you would do normally, and that is an important aspect of the work. So I write about Gordon Young's Fish Trail, and this is related to public art that's connected to migration, and in this case the arrival. Hull is the place where people came in from Eastern Europe, refugees and migrants who came from Eastern Europe into Hull, and the vast majority of which went across the country to Liverpool and then out to America. So this is a very familiar sculpture. I'm quite interested in this because it's I'm interested in the history of transmigration, but I'm also interested in the fact that there's very few sculptures, and you'll probably think of lots now that are exceptions, but there's very few sculptures on the coast that look from the sea back to the land, if that makes sense. Most of them are looking outwards to the sea, but this is almost from the sea looking to the land. So I think it's interesting for that point of view. Now this isn't a piece that I saw, but it's a piece that I'm really interested in, and some of you may have seen it and may know more about it. It was a projection of people leaving Hull, leaving the country, projected onto the P&O ferries as they left Hull. So this one is more about departing. There's just a little bit of information that I found out about it. So that brings me to what I'm thinking about and writing about at the moment, partly inspired by the toppling and the throwing into the docks in Bristol of the Colston statue. Colston was a slave trader, and this is actually an image that Barney sent me. So this isn't how well, obviously the statue isn't there now, but this is something that some artists in Bristol did to contextualize the statue, to take away from it being a celebration. So they've laid out, as you can see, a kind of floor plan of a slave ship, almost like a shadow, speaking back to this celebration of Colston. And so this got me thinking about toppled, demolished, absent, eroded, dispersed, dissolved public art. In other words, public art that isn't there, and how that could be as powerful as public art that is there. And it also fits in with a sort of theme that we've got running in Fish about above, below, at the edge of the water. So if I do get round to writing about this, I would really love to look at artworks that are placed in the space between high and low tide. So this really is Gormley's really famous piece on Crosby Beach, where the statues appear and disappear as the water rises and falls. So they're there, they're not, they're there, they're not. Like I always think of Whiteread's house like that. It is and it isn't. That's my little phrase to think about it. And in Hull, in Hull there was a text piece by Lawrence Viner, which was placed along the wooden barriers, the wooden struts alongside the River Hull. And again, those bits of text would appear and disappear with the water level. And I kind of think about that, you know, as a child, you would put a piece of paper underneath a line of writing to separate it so that you could read it. I think about the water as being that piece of paper falling and rising. Now, Winer's piece is no longer in Hull, and it's been moved to Bury, and it's alongside the River Ratcliffe. So the second photograph there are those same words, reconfigured in a slightly different order, and those run alongside the river. But again, they're by the side of the water, such that as the river rises and falls, the words appear and disappear. Similar idea that Banksy did alongside the Regent's Canal, and that was just after a climate conference in Copenhagen, and it's, you know, his comment on those people that don't believe in global warming. And then the other piece is Anna Glaccio's piece, The Two Sisters, which in 1998 was placed in the basin that's sort of in the River Humber, but near to where the River Hull comes out. And it's a public artwork that dissolved and is no longer there as a solid object, but it's somewhere. It's found its way somewhere. And at the end of Fountain 17, we did something a bit similar. We launched, or the artist Mike Chavy Dawson launched an unfired urinal into the River Humber, so that it would dissolve and disperse. We did a similar thing. So I'm not quite sure this is the last image. I'm not quite sure why I put it in. I think it's got something to do with how I feel about being in this group, and we've talked a number of times about like the despair of political, the larger political systems, and you know, lots of people have voiced how difficult it is not to have a voice, and so I suppose I kind of think, what's the antidote to that? There's a hope to go back to community-based things, grassroots things, smaller things, and just do what you can in that context, and to start again from the beginning almost. So that was I suppose that's how I feel about this group, and I love the group. I love the attention paid to people's work and to artworks, and to people's practice and what people think is important. Hang on, my son's just arrived. Oh no, he can come around the front door. And so I've just put that there to say, reflect something about how I feel about the group, and that's the end. So I'll stop my sharing.
Oh, Jill,
Very
that's
good.
been inspiring,
That's
amazing.
great.
Please, everybody, just kind of ask questions, put your comments forward.
I think it's interesting.
Very
It's interesting, Jill. It's interesting, Jill, that the Rachel Whiteread's house and lots of other great artworks from like the late mid-80s to 90s were made really on the back of Art Angel, weren't they? I think.
Yeah.
Art Angel was the company that offered this the funding for them. I think it was only about £20,000, I think, for the house, the Ghost, I think. And but without that, there was lots of works that could never be made. There was Michael Landy's Breakdown, which I don't know if you know about Breakdown, where he destroyed all his belongings in an old shop down Oxford Street, in a department store. He destroyed all the things that belonged to him throughout his life. He destroyed them all in a crusher, a mincer, and that happened only because Art Angel, were able to fund it. They're the kind of projects that nobody could ever get made or get built, and a bit like that nowadays, really. A bit like we need an Art Angel now, some kind of similar funding to enable, artists with radical ideas to get made.
I don't know if they're still going, because I might be wrong on this, Graham, but I thought I read recently or heard recently of a project, and then heard of art. Is it Art Angel or Art Angel?
Art Angel, yeah.
Art Angel. Of their, their part in it and their commissioning.
Yeah, I think they're still involved. Yeah. They just do very specific works that otherwise would never get made or seen.
No.
And it's brilliant what they do. Really, it's incredible.
Yeah. But those big projects are really part of a kind of regeneration model of public art, which is since the cuts and questions about regeneration on a bigger scale, they're much less common now. They belong to a kind of older model in a way.
Yeah. It was interesting what you said about, we was talking about the Banksy at the end there, pulling up the drawbridge.
Yeah.
And I think we've all been thinking quite a bit about this just recently, about, I suppose, the relevance of the group. It's almost taken on a new relevance, new pertinence, really, where all of a sudden now we're going back into a lockdown situation.
Yeah.
I think there's a need again for this to continue. I think we all of us find it, it's just a lovely thing to be able to share images together and kind of enable some kind of discourse, going on between, the creatives involved. So I think it's just a really useful, not as much for mental health. I think we talked to Marianne earlier on about, the mental health value it adds, to all of us, really. Even though we might not feel it, it just gives us an outlet or a kind of, regularity. I think that's so important, when everything else is in turmoil and falling down. Nobody knows what's really going on. But this is one stability that we can turn to. We can switch on every morning and add to it if we want, or just kind of consume it. I think that's a really important thing to have in life in general, really. Anybody who's not into art, who's not involved in the art world, how they manage to get through all this shit, I have no idea, really. Because, I would hate to be in that position, not to have something to occupy my mind and my thoughts and my kind of stress, really. So I think we've all got to value having art as, that constant in our lives, really.
And community, and having a community like our community, really, like not relying on a big, I don't know, college or organisation or anyone, just having a group who can start from scratch, really. Start from the beginning. I really appreciate it.
Jill, but I was actually wondering, kind of, you go around the country and look at all these amazing artworks and think about them and reflect upon them. Is there do you feel the urge to create art yourself when you actually engage so deeply with the topic? Because it's, you reflect upon those pieces so nicely, and as well, I think it's so beautiful, the pieces that you have picked. And I love the theme around, what did you say, kind of those pieces, that demolishment and what
Yeah.
is there and what isn't there. And I mean, what actually really just moved me is that kind of that Coulson statue and that shadow. And
I know.
I don't know, but is there, I mean, the question to me is, do you feel the need to kind of create something yourself again? And I think why I'm saying this as well is, you know, all of these conversations, one thing that really strikes me is how important artists are actually to society, you know, to have people reflect and create and, you know, turn things inside out and upside down and kind of move them around. So that's one question. And the other question would also be whether there is one of these projects that is your absolute favorite.
Oh. So I think if I don't feel like I want to make an object that would be public art. I think if I went back to art practice, it would have to be back to the beginning, back to drawing. It would have to be back to square one, and it would be observation based, and it would have to be quite private, I think, because it would be quite scary, I think. So, but as far as projects are concerned, I think I am interested, but more in the sense of collaborative work and making opportunities and working with people. I don't know if that makes sense. So rather than a kind of individual, I'll make this for there, I suppose, but I do think there is a creativity in working with people, making opportunities, developing that, enhancing that, maybe supporting that. It's only really an extension of being a teacher. And I think being a teacher for so long, in some ways, maybe knocked the artist out of me. Because whenever I started to do my own work, it just sounded like a project. But then I've so enjoyed setting things up for other people or making things possible for other people.
And you've been very successful at that. You've been very successful at that.
Oh, Julia, bless you.
Even in the last time I was talking to you, things you said, you're so good at doing that. Things you said have made me think again about some of the ideas I'm working with. And I think your rigor in the way you look at art is really essential to the art world, because if we didn't have people who did that, it'd be very easy for artists to get away with some very sloppy, you know, thinking. And I think you've helped me immensely. And going back to art college when I was old helped me immensely, because I was forced to think, but I couldn't do what you do because it takes such rigor, like I said, to do it. But already I only saw half of it because, as per usual, we got all our wires crossed with how we got onto the meeting and everything. But I found the last part I saw immediately recalled to me the very first thing that when I went to art college on the foundation as a 17-year-old, the first thing that sent me home in a kind of state was negative space. When they started teaching you about negative space. So when you were talking about the water going up and down, things appearing and disappearing, but still being there, it's a bit like what we were talking about, the back and the front of things. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And I thought that was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
And I've written about that in my PhD, although I'm sure my supervisors will ask me to cut it out. But I've said about that exercise that we all do about drawing the negative spaces, and then talking about that in terms of Rachel Whiteread's house and making the negative positive, and then thinking about it in text with Oldenburg's piece, like not the words but the spaces between the words. And so yes, all of those things are intertwined. But what you said about the teaching was lovely, Julian, thank you. But also you did a lot for me as a student. So that it's exactly the same. I can still remember an idea that you had that I thought was absolutely brilliant, and I would still love to work on with you. Do you remember the idea about having an exhibition and arranging it by, not by chronological order of the artworks, but by the age of the artist? And I just thought that was such a brilliant idea and would be so interesting. And it's something that I still think about. So, you know, it's lovely of you to say, oh, as a teacher, you did this, that, and
There's
the other.
lots of different ways of looking at chronology, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways you can divide things up and decide what is important. And for me, the experience of having been a young art student and then being an old art student, doing it a second time, raised an awful lot of things. I mean, I'm a practical person. I said I couldn't do what you do, but I do like following the trail. I like the idea of, I can't remember the name of the artist we had who came and did some teaching, and she came and talked to me an awful lot, but she had this thing where she kept saying, follow the trail, follow the trail. If you've got a word, look it up, find out where it goes, you know, why you're thinking that way. And it's been very helpful because I find it quite easy to relax into, almost like doodling. And I think artists need people like you to make them focus, to be honest. And I think this lockdown series we've been doing, that Marianne's been doing, is just wonderful because it is giving us an opportunity to talk about art. And there's only so long we can talk about art before you end up talking about Netflix. But, I'm lucky I share a house with an artist, so I can talk to somebody about art, but you need it. You really, really need it. You need it, that interaction. It's not just reading, or you need the interaction. You can watch art programs as long as you like, and they're, you know, one or two of the workshops they've done, like the Grace and Perry thing on TV, was fun, but you need that interaction. And I think this is marvelous, actually. And yes, I will say again, great teacher.
Excellent. And Julia, thank you, kind of, you know, just following up on that, because I agree, there's just something about coming together as a group and hearing about, you know, all of those different backgrounds and stories and interests, and kind of how it, I mean, for me, it often changes how I look at things. And actually, when we were both talking about those negative spaces and, you know, demolished public art, and I was thinking actually in the context of, you know, this crisis that we're going through, isn't there quite something, isn't there a kind of this negative space, you know, this virus and this lockdown, that we're actually really almost in a negative space, it feels, you know, we're kind of, it's like life inverted almost. So I think it's, I don't know, it's really interesting, you know, kind of this whole lockdown is, maybe we could look at it as a, you know, demolished life, or kind of the negative space, and we'll all emerge from it and reflect in these little moments together. So I think that's wonderful, and all your contributions and thoughts are so interesting. And I think there's something as well about continuing this dialogue throughout life, you know, because I think, you know, we often talk about student days when kind of, you know, we all were so enthused and talked about art probably all the time, but then it feels that dialogue, yeah, it just kind of falls off, isn't it? Where do you talk about this in a kind of informal,
well, you can be,
you know, because you're all very
a little bit odd.
Yeah. So just actually,
you can be considered a little bit odd if you want to talk about art.
Yeah.
In certain social spaces, if you want to talk about art, it can be difficult. I've been lucky in the last few years that I've found places, things like Women of Words, the same sort of feeling of being able to talk about things that are important in poetry and art, and it always seems to me like years ago, it was very all right to talk about all these things, but it probably never was. So it's probably a fantasy that people were always in salons talking about art.
Yeah.
I think everything has changed now, especially for this last year even. So when Marianne, you asked Jill about making things, I think we've got to have a kind of looser interpretation of what making is. And it's no longer a traditional painting or, like you say, salon work or something like that. It's much more about a series of creative decisions that ends up in a product, to be proud of. Really, I think even say like Marianne, I know your daughter's gone to college. That's a series of positive decisions over a very long time to end up with that outcome, and that's like a work of art. Really, when I look at the kids, my kids or my grandkids now, I think they're works of art really, and that's come about through a series of good, positive decisions. And so I often think you've got to think much more broadly about what art is. It's just a series of creative decisions. I know Lisa, in that slide you showed, Jill, of the interior in what was the exhibition called, Lisa? The Fountain 17.
Fountain 17.
Could Lisa just explain about those drawings that guy made, about those still life drawings?
Yeah.
What was his name? I've forgotten his name.
It was Phil.
Phil, of course. Yeah.
Philip, yeah, Phil. He what he did was he reused lots of little packages and all sorts of things in his cell, like pilchard tins and he kind of and I think he had like a yogurt pot and he put some water in it and he put a little flower so he sort of had used it as a vase and then did a watercolor drawing and watercolor painting of that. And then he had a tuna tin that he used as an ashtray. So he cleaned that out, used it as an ashtray. And what else did he have, Graham? There was lots of little kind of objects of packaging that he reused and put new life into them within his cell. And then
I think it was something about what Jill was talking about, something having a ghost identity where, something was for something and it's repurposed or recycled or reused. Yeah. It takes on a new identity in a way. I think that's exactly what Phil was doing with those drawings. Exactly what you were talking about with some of the work you've talked about, really. It's just finding a power in the kind of regeneration of something,
yeah. Can I just say?
Yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry. No, go on, Graham.
Well, I was just going to really say what you do in the prison really now is we always saw that as a work of art, didn't we? We always saw that as a big action or a big happening or something or performance. We always saw it as a piece of sculpture, didn't we? Work in the prison. I think now you're continuing to do that with these lads. That's a really, this idea of the artist's ego is gone really. It's much more interesting to be doing work like Lisa's doing and like Jill's doing with the Critical Fish, where you collaborate, making a collaboration. The artist as an ego really is so old-fashioned now. It's just nonsense, really. It's pathetic, and it seems a bit so pretentious. Although I do it, I get sick of myself really by doing it. I haven't got the energy or balls to go on a march, but I just make pictures about stuff like that. Really just egotistical. There's much more important things to be doing with your creative ability than just making pictures and sculpture. I think if you can raise a family well, or you can add value to somebody's life in many other ways. We're all artists, really. We're all, we've all got creative decision making within us. We all got imagination. It's just joining those two things up, and what was you going to say, Lisa?
I was just going to say to Jill, I really like the piece "Nothing Is Private" by Nina Edge. The net curtain is that really kind of struck a chord with me, especially at the minute. Yeah, especially at the minute with, like you say, with the lockdown and people being inside their houses. But also, I don't know whether anyone else has done this yet, but I downloaded that COVID-19 app, and it's like really weird because it scans wherever you are. It's always scanning. So if you go to like Asda or whatever and you're stood there, it's kind of like scanning around to, it sort of joins all the, you kind of feel basically like nothing is private. Yeah. It's like whenever you go with your phone now, it's kind of like it feels like you're being kind of watched, really. I mean, I know obviously it's for the good sort of intentions, but it does feel a bit weird. I don't know whether anyone else has experienced that. And it was just the title, and I really loved the curtains, that piece.
And it's funny because it's the public-private. So she would have made that because her house was threatened, or the street was threatened. It was going to be demolished. So nothing is private, nothing is mine. But also nothing. We could also think nothing is public. There's no public housing. There's only private interests. So it's. I love it too, Lisa. But I think part of my loving of it is the ambiguity or the opposition between public and private in the context of housing.
Actually, because one aspect of these lockdown reflections are my 4 questions to the speaker. So I'll just kind of would like to ask you, Jill, kind of what inspired you to join the group way back in whenever it was, a different lifetime ago almost. Hello. Sorry.
Well, it's it.
She got a picture.
Oh.
Sure.
Oh, what's your picture?
Hello.
Oh, wow.
Is it me? Is it me?
No.
That's amazing. Well done, our youngest member. Welcome.
That's right.
What's your name? Oh, sorry.
My name's Ivy. Go on, tell her. Hey? Sorry.
Okay, Jill, sorry, I had to acknowledge that little guest there.
But don't worry, it's a treat to see a child. It's a treat to see a child.
I think it was, it's that sense of community. I like collaboration. I like talking to people about ideas. Probably lost quite a lot of confidence when I lost my job, so I wouldn't necessarily find it easy to rock up to some situations and feel comfortable. But I've always found this group very, very accessible and comfortable. So yeah, it's the idea about community, and I did read something in a book recently about people. This was a different context, like I suppose when people dropped out in the 60s, or I'm not saying that we're doing that, but there was a phrase they said that they wanted to start rebuilding the economic, social and spiritual structures from the beginning. And I don't think we can do that, but sometimes I wonder, well, what can we do? What can we do politically? What can we do in all this difficult, corrupt, unequal situation that we're in? We can have our community and start some things again from the beginning, even if it's just how do we talk about art, or how do we pay attention to each other, how do we listen to what's important to people. So I think it's important to me because it is a community, and it has been a nice one to be part of. I haven't felt difficult about joining and talking to strangers and things. So yeah, that's the answer to that one.
I think if anybody who watched the political debate last night in America, you see how far the human condition has regressed, through lack of creative thought and lack of empathy. I mean, that was appalling, really, to watch men behaving like that last night on television. Made me embarrassed, actually, to be a man and to have similar physiology. I just find it was a total embarrassment, to see how far degraded we have become, or certainly in America. And so I think, that's what they're lacking there, is that sense of humanity, which we all share, as creatives and as looking at other people's work, trying to see into other people's lives. And that's the beauty of, what art does. I think what those guys last night, they need to go on an art course and maybe study some fine art for a while and try and regain a little bit of humanity, which is sadly completely lost over there.
Yeah.
And is damaging that country so badly at the moment.
It is shocking, isn't it? And to consider that those are the leaders of the
Exactly.
country. It's not just any kind of playground debate, isn't it? Or in a pub, you'd expect a better conversation actually in any pub.
It's like a billionaire's trophy. It's like a billionaire's trophy now to go for. You know, I just wish Michelle Obama had gone for it. Really, that's what I was. I hope she might do next time. But anyway, we need more women. We need more women. Like I said before, we need many more women in these positions.
Yeah, but it's an interesting time, isn't it? And how can we bridge that time until, you know, we again are in the hands of some, humans with empathy and education and thoughts. It feels like we need to bridge that time and just somehow get through it. And
the thing I don't understand, America has given us some of the most creative musicians, artists, you know, philosophers, scientists, you know, brilliant people in America, but yet none of them are involved in politics. It seems like they just, you know, harvest the politicians from, I don't know, just some kind of lunatic asylum or macho kind of boys club or something like that. I just don't understand where on earth.
It's not new though, is it, to have corrupt politicians? It's not like we can pretend it just happened.
Yeah, but it's
I know been a long time coming. It's been.
But in this time of accountability and social awareness and accountability.
Oh yeah, I would agree with accountability. Yeah, I think the accountability is. Just disappeared. You seem to be. I mean, that I often debate with myself where some of the repressive things of my parents' generation, which I obviously rebelled against. Some of them might have had a point, because at least people had, you know, an idea of what it was to have good manners, you know, and I now kind of look back, as we're all doing, I think, looking back a lot in this lockdown. I find myself thinking about my parents and thinking of them as good people, even within, because they had a morality which seems to have just be disappearing by the, you know, and that is, you know, they weren't perfect people, but they had morality, and there seems to be a distinct absence of honesty, and you know, I don't know how where we go. As just said, what can we do?
The thing that's incredible about it is that in the past there was an ignorance or a kind of a simpleness to life, really, whereas now we've got this wall-to-wall mass media coverage pervading to all our lives. So you would think those people at the top would have to be more accountable, have to be more careful, you know, more humanitarian, more, you know, aware of all the current issues and diversity issues. You would think they would have to be like that because of all the attention on them from all over. But yet, for somehow, they just seem to recklessly just get away with, and because it does appeal to certain people, you know, a certain group of people. That's a problem. You know, there's still so many individuals. Sadly lost, you know, and I don't know. It's just such a shocking thing to witness.
There were so many things that when I was young, I thought we'd moved forward and resolved that seemed to have gone backwards. There are things that we have gone forwards. There's no question about that. There are lots of attitudes towards, you know, women, men that have been very thought-provoking in the last decade, I think, and immensely interesting. But instead of that making us progress in the other things, it seems like we've moved our focus somewhere for a short while, and meanwhile these terrible, and I have to say largely men, not only men, but have
pretty much
so incredibly powerful, so frighteningly powerful.
Sorry, Julia, I think you're frozen.
And getting away with doing and saying whatever.
It's down to the youth, really. I mean, it's down to the youth progression. You know, they're the ones that are embarrassing the rest of us, really.
Yeah.
It's down to the students. That's what it's on. You know, they're the future.
I read somewhere recently, and it's really a sentence that stuck with me, and I'm sorry if I've mentioned this in this group already, but it does give me tremendous hope. And it was a young kid of a friend, and he said, apparently, which I think is so mature, he said, well, you know, we were born into your world, but you'll die in ours. That's genius.
That's good.
So, you know, obviously they're hatching plans, I think. So
Yeah, good.
we just somehow have to get through it. And my worry is just somehow stop that they do too much damage, these leaders at the moment. And it does feel a little bit that, you know, they kind of wreck. I mean, here in Britain, isn't it, without the support of the government for the culture sector, I think the long-term consequences of what's happening will be felt for years to come. So I think it's all about trying to find ways to kind of just survive and kind of keep some momentum, keep some humanity, keep some hope. I don't know. And yeah, I think, you know, this is another side effect of this group. You know, we talk about these important issues aside from art, and it feels art and politics are just linked so closely. And because we need any way that we can use to kind of make a point or just kind of continue to exist and prepare for another time. Part of me sometimes wants to be really radical and activist and change things like now and here, but it feels like we've reached this pinnacle where, you know, some very powerful people have spoken out and voiced concerns, and it just doesn't seem to kind of have any impact. You know, I think even, you know, David Attenborough is probably at his wits' ends about what else he can do. But it's just
brilliant when the kid, did you see when the kids were asking him questions about wildlife, about zoology? There was a group of school kids asking him questions about zoology on TV last night. It was brilliant. You know, really, really good. He's just, you know, really, he's a brilliant guy. Brilliant.
Well, the thing I feel also is that a lot of the politicians pay lip service to, you know, oh, we care about culture, we care about the theatre. But there is such a strong feeling of narcissism going on amongst these leaders at the moment that makes you feel it's purely paying lip service. They're better acting than the actors. They're just pretending to you don't feel any sincerity or passion, like you mentioning David Attenborough. It's about passion, and there is loss of passion. And I can only look, as you say, to young people. I thought that was marvellous what you said. It's a bit like my granddaughter said to me, well, the reason you can't keep up is because you're old.
Excellent. Okay, Jill, so just my two last questions combined into one. So again, this is actually a question itself. What do you think the new normal will be? And what is your wish for the future?
What was the first bit, sorry? What was the...
What do you think the new normal will be? Because that was always the discussion at the beginning, isn't it? So it's kind of stayed, I think it's a really interesting.
Yeah, well, for me, I'll answer it for me personally. I'd love to be one of those people that said, I really saw the light and saw the right way and I was enlightened, but actually I'm spending a lot of my time doing footnotes, which is the most pedantic thing to do. Okay, so what would what my wish for the future be? Oh gosh, so much, like equality and all of those, planet. But I suppose what I think about a bit now at the moment is paying attention. I think that comes out of this group, to really pay attention to something, not to float across a million things and be bombarded, but to pay attention and then to learn to look differently or outside of convention and to see things differently. So opportunities to do that.
Oh, that sounds great.
And also I'd really like there to be a planet in the future for Ruby and Harry, my grandchildren, to live on.
That article you put on Facebook, that's another thing, the gender thing. I read first thing this morning, and that's one of the things I find interesting, is that I didn't engage very much with Facebook and whatever, apart from probably promoting my own work, but I have read some tremendously interesting things in the paper. But I feel when I see that somebody I know has put that on, who I respect and believe would have, I found that so interesting this morning, and there have been lots of things like that that I probably wouldn't have read, probably wouldn't have thought about so much, that you know, I find this is focusing us a bit on things in a way that I probably wasn't before.
I think that's a really good point, Julia. It's a bit like a network of people you kind of trust. So I picked that up from actually my brother's first girlfriend, who now lives in New Zealand, and kept vaguely in contact. But I know when she posts something, it's going to be strong, you know, and she recommends it. So I read it, really enjoyed it. I thought it was so clear. And then I put it on our group because I thought, oh yeah, there might be other people who've been in a bit of muddy water with some of those issues, and they might appreciate that clarity. So you got it from me, but I just got it from Stephanie. You know, so that's a good point. We make our networks and we share our stuff.
Well, it helped a lot because my daughter and I have had talks, and I inadvertently say things that always annoy her to do with gender. Like, oh,
me too, Julia. Me too with my daughter.
And then she comes back like with about 100 texts about why I shouldn't think that way, which is good because it makes you think about things. Definitely. But I particularly like that because it had clarity to it.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I'd just like to do a plug actually for somebody? Just the kind of story, the kind of narrative of this is really quite powerful, I think. When me and Lisa was at the university last year, we did a series of workshops, drawing workshops, and an elderly lady came along to those workshops, and she was telling us that she was a student at Corsham School of Art, and that was back in the 60s, and she's 88 now. And she just connected recently with this group, and she's found it a real solace in her life. Her husband has passed away a few years ago, and so she's been an artist all those years, being taught by Howard Hodgkin, all the great abstract artists, Adrian Heath, Clifford Ellis, Henry Cliff, all the great artists from the 50s and 60s she was taught by. And then she went for a period without making for lots of years and just started again recently. Now, just if anybody gets a chance just to have a look at the work that she's making now, that's come on the back of our workshops and this group, and just to see how it's transformed her life. She sent me some lovely letters, some lovely messages today, and it's just so much joy. Her name is Michelle Noble, M-I-C-H-E, Michelle Noble. She just started making some collages. But that's a testament to how powerful this group can be.
Yeah.
Not only this situation, there's a couple of things, that it's really impacted upon people's life in a very positive way that I'm aware of. And it's testament really to Marianne for setting this thing up really, and having the foresight, the power of a group, collective, like mental health. Like I was talking about, it's almost like a group, therapy session in some respects, and it's so important for people to be able to come together in that kind of forum. But if you just check Michelle's work out, you'll see, I'm trying to encourage to get more things out there. So it's Michelle Noble. But if somebody
she's just set up an Instagram account, hasn't she?
That's right. She's just and she joined our group, which is on Facebook. Is she on Facebook as well, Lisa? I think
she's on. Yeah, she's on the Still Life group.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but and she's loving it. She's really kind of just going through like a second. I mean, she's a brilliant character, isn't she, Lisa?
Yeah, she's lovely.
She's so effervescent, and for 88, it's so, I mean, I've never known anybody that old in my family who's still got the marbles. She's absolutely sharp as a razor, and but a little bit infirm. But I know she just love to see anybody, talking about her work or liking her work. It would mean the world to her.
Oh, excellent!
It's transformed her life.
I mean, I find it so fascinating. I find people that maintain that vitality and that, thirst for life and that vibrancy. I think I love that. I find that really fascinating. So yeah, definitely. That's really nice to hear. Thank you, Graham.
Okay.
Anything like that. I think it's nice to share other people's stories as well on here and just talk about what inspires us, which is often beyond, what's immediately in front of us. Oh, it's been wonderful. It's been really, really nice again. And I'm very pleased that I'm going to do this 2 weekly. I think for now, maybe. Is that okay? Or shall we go back to weekly? I wasn't what do you think, actually? I mean, I've got the next one in 2 weeks, which actually will be Roger Roach, which I can announce now. So we're really looking forward to that. But it's in 2 weeks' time. But I think now that the days are drawing close and it's becoming cold, maybe we'll go back to weekly. And again, as well, any suggestions of people that you think might want to present in here in this forum. I was also thinking maybe of extending it even to people that we know in Hull or beyond that might not necessarily be part of the group. I don't know, because yeah, otherwise we might be running out of kind of people to present their work to us. So have a little think. Let me know what you think, because we're a collective, we're collaborating, and you know, we do this together. So
I mean, if we get Michelle to present, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
That would be good, wouldn't it?
She's lived it. You know, she's familiar with all the great artists of the past. You know, it's just like a, you know.
Is she okay with Zoom and things like that, or would you be able to help? You know, I'm just wondering.
What, sorry?
Would she be okay with Zoom and the technology? Again, this might be actually ages what I'm spouting here. You know.
I'll tell you how bad that is. I've been having to tell her what to do, and I'm the worst. I think she's taking the phone going really. So if she's relying on me, she's not that good.
Yeah, I mean, Graham, happily, if you want to approach her.
I'll see.
Yeah.
I could maybe go around to her house and set her up on this or something like that. Maybe do that.
Excellent.
I'll see what she says.
Okay, so my dinner's on the table. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jill, so much for really an incredible, insightful, very inspiring. I've made lots of notes and lots of things I'm going to revisit, people I've known about, but I just love, and I just want to kind of just look at their stuff again. So thank you very, very much. Thank you everybody else for, you know, being great contributors and great audience, and yeah, just keep posting and keep inviting people, and yeah, take care, stay safe.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.